All right, picture this. You're sitting on your porch, minding your own business, and a stray cat walks up and drops a dead mouse at your feet. Or maybe you're a fisherman, out on a quiet morning, and a dolphin pushes something toward your boat, and it's a baby dolphin, injured, barely breathing. Or maybe it's even weirder. A wild fox shows up at someone's back door, carrying one of its kits in its mouth, and just leaves it there. Waits, watches, then disappears into the woods. These aren't rare flukes. They happen more often than you'd think, all over the world, across dozens of species. Cats, dogs, dolphins, elephants, birds, even bears. Animals bringing their babies, or things that look suspiciously like offerings, straight to humans. And the question that should be bugging you right now is simple. Why on earth would a wild animal, something that's supposed to be terrified of us, hand over the one thing it should be protecting more than anything else in the world? Because let's be honest, from an evolutionary standpoint, this makes zero sense. Animals spend their entire lives avoiding humans. We're predators. We're loud, we're unpredictable, we build machines that flatten forests and pollute rivers. If you're a wild animal, humans are basically the final boss of your ecosystem. So when a mother animal takes her baby, her genetic legacy, the thing she's biologically wired to protect at all costs, and carries it toward the most dangerous creature on the planet, something bigger is going on. And once you start pulling on that thread, you end up in this fascinating mix of psychology, biology, and honestly, some genuinely heartwarming true stories. So let's start with the one almost everyone's experienced firsthand, even if they didn't realize what it actually meant: your cat bringing you dead things. If you own a cat, you already know the horror of waking up to a gift on your pillow. A bird, a mouse, sometimes just parts of a mouse, because apparently your cat felt like sharing was optional. For decades, people assumed cats did this because they saw humans as pathetic hunters who needed help. Like, wow, my human hasn't caught anything in weeks. Better step in. And honestly, that theory isn't entirely wrong, but it's not the full picture either. Cats are natural born hunters, but domestic cats have also had thousands of years to bond with humans in a way their wild ancestors never did. In multiple studies on domestic cat behavior, researchers have found that this gift bringing behavior largely echoes what mother cats do with their kittens. When a kitten is young, the mother doesn't just hand over food. She brings home injured or partially incapacitated prey and lets the kitten finish the job. It's basically hunting school. Bite the neck here, chase this way, pounce like that. It's training disguised as a snack. Now, here's the twist. When an adult cat brings prey to you, especially if you're the one who feeds them, some researchers believe your cat isn't necessarily seeing you as a bad hunter. It's possible your cat sees you as part of its social group, sometimes literally treating you like an oversized, clumsy kitten who needs some guidance. Cats that are especially bonded to their owners are more likely to do this gifting behavior, and it tends to increase with trust, not decrease. So next time your cat drops a dead lizard on your kitchen floor at 6 a.m. in a weird way, that's a compliment. A gross, slightly traumatic compliment, but a compliment nonetheless. Dogs do something similar, though with a slightly different flavor. Dogs are pack animals, and in wolf packs, this kind of provisioning behavior is deeply wired into their social structure. Wolves that go out hunting will regurgitate food for pups that stayed behind at the den. It sounds disgusting to us, but to a wolf, it's basically room service. Domestic dogs still carry echoes of that instinct, even though most of them have never hunted anything scarier than a tennis ball. That's why your dog might bring you a toy, a slipper, or randomly one shoe from a pair it definitely did not ask permission to steal. It's an offering. It's a "look what I found, I want to share this moment with you" gesture, rooted in pack bonding. But okay, dead mice and stolen socks are one thing. What happens when we're talking about actual baby animals? Real, living offspring being brought directly to humans by their parents? That's where things start getting genuinely wild. Let's talk about elephants first, because their story might be one of the most emotionally devastating and fascinating examples of this whole phenomenon. Elephants are famous for their intelligence and their deep emotional bonds, not just with their own herd, but sometimes with humans who have helped them. There are documented cases, especially in parts of Africa and Asia, of elephant matriarchs approaching humans, usually humans who have previously helped injured elephants like rangers, sanctuary workers, or conservationists, and essentially presenting their newborn calves to them. One widely reported case involved an elephant herd that had been rescued from poachers years earlier. When the matriarch of that herd gave birth, she led the entire family group back to the exact humans who had saved her, walking for miles, just to let the newborn calf be near them. Elephants have long memories and complex social recognition systems. Researchers who study elephant cognition believe that this kind of behavior isn't random. It's closer to trust building, almost like the elephant is saying, "You helped me, now here's the next generation. Please continue being someone we can rely on." Now, dolphins take this to a different level entirely, because dolphins have this reputation, somewhat deserved, for treating humans like honorary pod members. There are multiple documented cases of dolphins nudging injured or struggling swimmers to safety, something scientists believe stems from dolphins' natural behavior of supporting injured pod members at the surface so they can breathe. But there's an even stranger version of this. Fishermen and researchers around the world have reported cases of dolphins pushing sick or injured baby dolphins toward boats, almost as if seeking help from humans directly. In a few instances, marine biologists were able to intervene, treat the young dolphin for injuries or parasites, and release it back to its mother, who was reportedly waiting nearby the entire time. Whether dolphins fully understand what humans can do to help is still debated, but the pattern is consistent enough that scientists don't dismiss it as coincidence anymore. And it's not just dolphins in open water, there have been strange, almost unbelievable cases involving whales too. Fishermen off the coast of Mexico have described gray whales approaching their boats, seemingly on purpose, and nudging their calves close enough to be touched. Gray whales were once hunted so aggressively that they earned a reputation as some of the most aggressive and human-avoidant whales in the ocean. But in specific lagoons where whaling stopped decades ago, something shifted. Mothers now regularly approach boats, sometimes lifting their calves partially out of the water as if introducing them. Researchers studying this behavior suspect it might be linked to generational trust, almost like whale culture evolving to recognize that humans in this specific area are no longer a threat. Which brings up an important idea we need to pause on for a second. Trust isn't just an individual thing for a lot of these animals. It can be cultural. It can be passed down. If a species learns over years or even generations that a certain group of humans is safe, that information can spread through the population, especially in intelligent social species like elephants, dolphins, and whales. Now, let's swing over to something smaller, but honestly just as strange: birds. Crows and magpies are famous for their intelligence, arguably rivaling primates in some cognitive tests. And there are countless anecdotes, some documented by researchers, of crows leaving small trinkets for humans who feed them regularly. Buttons, shiny bits of metal, small bones, even tiny bits of colored glass. This isn't the same as bringing babies, but it's part of the same broader pattern: reciprocity. Crows appear to understand the concept of a fair trade. If you feed them consistently, they start bringing you things in return. One widely reported case involved a young girl in Seattle who fed crows in her backyard for years, and the crows began leaving her small gifts almost daily, seemingly in response to the food she provided. But there's also a rarer, more emotionally loaded version of bird behavior worth mentioning. Some wildlife rehabilitators have reported cases where a wild bird, after being helped by a human, nursed back to health after an injury, for example, will later return with a mate or with offspring, seemingly to show them off, or at least to remain near the human who helped it. Owls, hawks, even wild parrots in some regions have displayed this kind of behavior. It's not fully understood, but many researchers believe it ties back into imprinting and associative memory. If a human represents safety and food in an animal's mind, that association doesn't just disappear. Sometimes it gets passed on, at least behaviorally, to the animal's young. Now here's where things get even stranger, because we haven't even touched on some of the most unsettling and emotionally intense cases. Wild predators bringing their injured or orphaned young directly to humans for help. There's a well-documented account from a wildlife rescue center in South Africa, where a leopard, notoriously one of the most human-avoidant big cats on the planet, was seen approaching a ranger station at night. This was already unusual because leopards go out of their way to avoid human settlements. But this leopard didn't run. She approached slowly, cautiously, and dropped one of her cubs near the entrance before retreating into the darkness. The cub was severely dehydrated and injured, likely from a fight with another predator. Rangers were able to treat the cub, and remarkably, camera traps later showed the mother returning nights later, seemingly checking on the area, though she never came close enough to be seen clearly again. By the way, if you want to go even deeper into the secret lives of ancient humans, I just launched a full course called The Secret Lives of Ancient Humans. 10 modules, 3+ hours of content covering everything we never talk about on YouTube. What they feared, how they communicated, what hunted them, and much more. Plus an exclusive PDF guide included. Link in the description. See you inside. Foxes have shown similar behavior in parts of Europe and North America, especially in areas where humans have previously rescued injured foxes or provided food during harsh winters. There are documented backyard cases of a fox mother leaving a sick or injured kit near a home, then disappearing only to return later once the kit has been treated by a wildlife rehabber or veterinarian, almost as if she understood the outcome and trusted the process. Researchers who study fox behavior have pointed out that foxes are incredibly perceptive when it comes to reading human patterns. If a fox has repeatedly seen a human respond calmly and helpfully to distressed animals, it may generalize that experience into a form of trust that overrides its natural fear response, at least temporarily, in an emergency. So at this point, you're probably noticing a pattern here, and it's worth spelling it out clearly. Almost every one of these cases involves prior positive contact with humans. This isn't random animals walking up to random strangers, it's almost always animals that have some history, direct or indirect, with humans who've proven themselves safe, helpful, or non-threatening. This actually connects to a broader concept in animal behavior science called learned safety. Just like animals can learn to fear certain sounds, smells, or shapes through negative experiences, they can also learn the opposite. If an environment or a specific human consistently produces positive or neutral outcomes, an animal's brain updates its risk assessment. Over time, especially in species with strong memory and social learning capabilities, that safety signal can become deeply ingrained, sometimes even passed down through social learning to offspring who never directly experienced the original positive interaction. There's also a slightly darker, more desperate version of this whole phenomenon worth mentioning, because not every case is warm and fuzzy. Sometimes, animals bring their young to humans not out of trust, but out of sheer desperation. In areas hit by natural disasters like floods, wildfires, or droughts, wildlife rescue centers report a massive spike in animals approaching humans directly, sometimes carrying or leading their young toward human settlements. This isn't really about trust in these cases. It's survival math. When the environment becomes so hostile that even the danger of humans becomes the lesser risk, animals will take that gamble. Deer, raccoons, even normally reclusive animals like bobcats have been documented approaching homes during extreme weather events, sometimes with young in tow, essentially seeking any form of shelter or resource, humans included. This actually flips the whole question a bit, doesn't it? Because we started by asking why an animal would trust a predator like us with something as precious as its offspring. But sometimes the answer isn't trust at all. Sometimes it's just that we've become, in certain specific contexts, the safer bet compared to the alternative. Let's go back to something a little lighter for a moment, because this next example is honestly one of the most oddly wholesome ones out there. Domesticated farm animals doing the exact same thing. If you've ever spent time on a farm or spoken to someone who is, you'll hear stories about hens, goats, and even pigs bringing their newborns directly to a trusted human caretaker almost immediately after birth. This is incredibly common with domesticated species, partly because thousands of years of selective breeding have essentially wired in a level of trust toward humans that wild animals simply don't have. A mother hen, for example, will often let a trusted farmer handle her chicks within hours of hatching, something that would be basically unthinkable with a wild bird. Goats are especially notable for this. Goat farmers frequently describe mother goats nudging their newborn kids toward them almost immediately, sometimes even before the kid has fully stood up on its own legs. Some researchers believe this ties into domestication syndrome, a suite of behavioral and even physical changes that occur in species bred alongside humans for generations. Domesticated animals often show reduced fear responses, more juvenile behaviors persisting into adulthood, and stronger social bonding tendencies toward humans specifically. Basically, thousands of years of selective breeding have softened that predator versus prey line just enough that many farm animals genuinely categorize humans as part of their extended social circle, sometimes even above other animals. Now, here's a question you might be asking at this point. Is this behavior actually intentional on the animal's part, or are we just humans projecting meaning onto instinctual behavior? And honestly, the answer is probably somewhere in the middle, and it depends heavily on the species. For less cognitively complex animals, a lot of this gifting and presenting babies behavior likely boils down to pure instinct, shaped over generations by whatever behaviors historically improved survival odds. A hen doesn't necessarily understand trust in the way we do. She's responding to learned safety cues and instinctual patterns passed down through domestication. But for more cognitively advanced animals, elephants, dolphins, crows, even some primates, there's growing evidence that something closer to genuine relational understanding might be happening. These animals have demonstrated theory of mind in various studies, meaning they can, to some extent, understand that other beings, including humans, have their own perspectives, intentions, and capabilities. When an elephant matriarch specifically seeks out the humans who helped her before, that's not just blind instinct. That looks a lot more like memory, association, and a form of gratitude, or at the very least, strategic trust building. There's actually a fascinating evolutionary theory tied into all of this called the self-domestication hypothesis, originally used to explain human evolution, but increasingly applied to interspecies relationships as well. The basic idea is that across evolutionary history, individual animals within a species that showed reduced aggression and increased sociability toward outsiders, including humans, sometimes gained survival advantages: access to food scraps, protection from other predators, shelter during harsh conditions. Over enough generations, this could create feedback loops where entire local populations of a species become gradually more comfortable around humans, essentially self-selecting for trust-based behaviors because those behaviors paid off. This theory helps explain something really interesting: why certain populations of the same species behave completely differently toward humans depending on their location. Gray whales near heavily whaled regions remain skittish and avoidant. Gray whales in protected lagoons approach boats and present their calves. Same species, wildly different behavior, shaped entirely by generational experience with humans. Now let's take a moment to talk about one of the more emotionally heavy but important angles here. What happens when this trust goes wrong? Because unfortunately, not every human response to these situations is positive, and wildlife experts consistently warn about a serious problem tied to all of this: well-meaning people accidentally kidnapping baby animals that were never actually abandoned in the first place. This happens constantly with deer fawns, for example. Mother deer often leave their fawns hidden in tall grass for hours at a time while they forage nearby, specifically because the fawn's lack of scent and camouflage pattern makes it safer alone than sticking close to the mother, who has a strong scent predators can track. People find these seemingly abandoned fawns, assume the worst, and take them home, when in reality, the mother was watching from a distance the entire time and planned to return. This is actually one of the most important distinctions to make in this entire topic. A lot of viral stories about animals bringing their babies to humans are actually misunderstood situations where humans intervened in a completely normal, healthy wild behavior. Wildlife rehabilitators constantly stress the same message: unless a baby animal is visibly injured, in immediate danger, or the parent is confirmed dead, the best action is almost always to leave it alone and observe from a distance. So with that in mind, how do you actually tell the difference between a genuine case of an animal seeking help and a situation where the animal is just doing normal parenting behavior that looks alarming to us? Wildlife experts generally point to a few key signals. Visible injury or bleeding is an obvious one. Extended time alone, well beyond what's typical for that species, is another, though this varies wildly depending on the animal. Direct, repeated approach toward humans, especially paired with clear vocal distress signals, is usually a stronger indicator of an actual emergency rather than normal parental spacing behavior. And in genuinely rare cases, like the leopard example from earlier, a parent animal directly approaching a human settlement and leaving offspring there before retreating is different enough from typical behavior that experts generally interpret it as intentional and needing intervention. Now, here's something that might blow your mind a little. Some of the most striking modern examples of this phenomenon are happening specifically because of climate change and habitat loss, and honestly, this adds a much heavier layer to the whole topic. As natural habitats shrink and food sources become less predictable, more and more wild animals are being pushed into closer contact with human settlements out of necessity, not choice. Researchers tracking urban wildlife have noted a measurable increase over the past couple of decades in animals like coyotes, foxes, and even certain bird species nesting closer to human areas and displaying reduced fear responses. Some of the trust we're seeing might not purely be about goodwill or learned safety in the traditional sense. Some of it might be animals running out of other options. It's a bittersweet realization, honestly. On one hand, you have these genuinely touching stories of interspecies trust, animals essentially reaching across an evolutionary divide to connect with humans in a meaningful way. On the other hand, some of that same behavior is a quiet signal of ecosystems under stress, animals adapting because their traditional environments simply can't support them the way they used to. Let's bring this back around to something a little more grounded and personal, because at the end of the day, most people watching this aren't interacting with wild elephants or gray whales. Most of us are dealing with cats and dogs. So let's circle back to that, because there's actually a scientifically interesting layer here that a lot of people miss. When your dog brings you a toy or your cat drops a dead bug on your foot, that behavior is reinforced every single time you respond, even if your response is disgust. Animals, especially social ones, are incredibly good at reading attention as a reward, even negative attention. So if your cat brings you a dead mouse and you scream, that dramatic reaction might actually be reinforcing the exact behavior you're trying to discourage, because to your cat, you just gave a huge, exciting response to something they did. From their perspective, mission accomplished. This ties into something animal behaviorists call the social reward loop. Many of these gift giving and baby presenting behaviors persist and even intensify over time specifically because humans respond with attention, whether that's affection, surprise, or even mild horror. The animal learns that this behavior gets a reaction, and reactions in most social species are inherently valuable because in the wild, attention often correlates with survival advantages like access to resources, protection, or social bonding. So, in a strange way, every time you react to your pet's weird offering, you're actively shaping the relationship, reinforcing a communication loop that's been evolving between humans and animals for literally thousands of years. Now, if we zoom out and look at the big picture here, what we're really looking at is this incredibly complex web of instinct, memory, social learning, environmental pressure, and yes, sometimes genuine emotional connection, all overlapping to create these moments that feel almost magical when we witness them. A dolphin nudging her injured calf toward a boat. An elephant walking her newborn miles just to be near the humans who once saved her. A leopard, one of the most solitary and human-avoidant animals on Earth, choosing, in a moment of desperation, to trust a stranger with the life of her cub. These moments aren't just cute internet stories. They're windows into something deeper about how intelligence, memory, and trust function across species lines. They challenge this idea that humans and wild animals exist in completely separate, disconnected worlds. Because clearly, at least in specific circumstances, animals are capable of recognizing individual humans, remembering positive interactions, and making surprisingly sophisticated decisions based on that memory. Sometimes decisions involving the most important thing in their entire biological existence, the survival of their offspring. And maybe that's the real takeaway here. Trust isn't some uniquely human trait we invented. It's something that exists in different forms and different intensities across the animal kingdom whenever the right conditions line up. A history of safety, a pattern of help, a moment of desperation with nowhere else to turn. Put those pieces together, and suddenly the line between wild animal and trusted companion gets a lot blurrier than most of us ever expected. So the next time your dog drops a slobbery tennis ball in your lap, or your cat leaves you a very unfortunate present by the front door, maybe don't just see it as gross or annoying. Somewhere buried in that instinct is the same ancient thread connecting your living room to elephant herds in Africa, whale lagoons in Mexico, and leopard dens in the wild. It's the same fundamental behavior, just scaled differently. A creature deciding in its own way that you are safe enough to be trusted with something precious. And honestly, that's pretty incredible when you think about it.